The afternoon began like any other, quiet and ordinary. The kind of day that did not warn anyone it was about to change a life. Margaret Lewis stood in her small Vermont home, folding warm laundry fresh from the dryer, her thoughts drifting without effort. The house was calm, filled with the soft hum of routine, yet something unseen pressed against her chest, a feeling she could not name. Since her husband died 6 years ago, Margaret had learned how to survive silence. She woke early, worked at the local library, cooked simple meals, and spent evenings with books or old movies. Her son Ethan was the center of her world. He was 24 now, tall, thoughtful, and trying to find his place in life. They had grown close after the loss, leaning on each other in ways that felt natural at the time. But lately, things were shifting. Ethan visited less. When he did, his smile did not fully reach his eyes, spoke quickly, asked fewer questions, and left earlier than usual. Margaret told herself it was normal. Children grow. Lives move forward. Still, a quiet worry followed her like a shadow. That afternoon, her phone rang, sharp and sudden, cutting through the calm. She wiped her hands on a towel and glanced at the screen. The name surprised her. Daniel Harper. Her heart skipped, not from fear, but from the fragile hope she had been guarding for months. Daniel was someone she met by chance at a community fundraiser. He was kind, thoughtful, and careful with his words. They shared coffee, then long talks, then walks that stretched past sunset. Margaret had not told Ethan about him yet. She was waiting for the right moment, afraid of how it might change things. She answered the phone, expecting warmth. Instead, Daniel's voice sounded tight, uncertain, like a man standing at the edge of something he did not plan to face. He said her name slowly, as if choosing it with care, then paused. Margaret felt her breath catch. He told her Ethan had come to see him earlier that day. The words landed hard, each one sinking deeper than the last. Margaret's fingers curled around the phone as questions rushed through her mind. How did Ethan even know? What had he said? Daniel spoke carefully, not angry but shaken. He explained that Ethan arrived without warning, polite but intense, asking questions that felt too heavy for a first meeting. Questions about intentions, about whether Daniel planned to stay or leave, about whether he understood what Margaret had been through. Daniel said Ethan never raised his voice, but his meaning was clear. He was guarding something he believed belonged to him. Margaret felt a mix of emotions rise all at once: shock, confusion, and a quiet ache she had not felt before. She thanked Daniel for telling her and ended the call, standing still as the silence rushed back in. The laundry lay, forgotten. The house felt different now, as if it were holding its breath. Memories flooded her mind, moments of Ethan as a boy, holding her hand too tightly after his father's funeral, sleeping on the floor beside her bed when grief was too loud. She understood his fear. She understood his need to protect. But something about this felt wrong. Not cruel, not loud, just misplaced. Margaret sat down slowly, the weight of the moment pressing on her shoulders. She realized she had crossed into a new season of life without noticing. She was no longer only a mother surviving loss. She was a woman learning how to hope again. And somewhere along the way, her son had mistaken her strength for fragility. Outside, the day continued as if nothing had happened. Cars passed. Birds moved between trees. But inside that small house, a quiet line had been touched, one neither of them had spoken about before. Margaret did not yet know what she would say to Ethan or how this would change their bond. She only knew that something important had shifted, and once a line is crossed, even softly, it can never fully disappear. Ethan did not wake up that morning, planning to interfere in his mother's life. But the weight in his chest had been building for weeks, growing heavier with every unanswered question. He loved Margaret more than anything, and since his father's death, that love had quietly turned into responsibility. He remembered how she had withdrawn after the funeral, how her smile disappeared for months, how he became the one who checked. the locks at night, and listened for her quiet tears through the wall. Even as he grew older, that role stayed with him. When he accidentally learned about Daniel overhearing a conversation Margaret thought was private fear, rushed in before reason could catch up. He imagined another man walking in and out of her life, leaving damage behind, reopening wounds she worked so hard to close. Ethan told himself he wasn't jealous, that this was not about control, but about protection. Still, the truth sat uneasily beneath his calm face. He drove to Daniel's office with steady hands and a racing mind, practicing words that sounded respectful but firm. When Daniel opened the door, surprised to see him, Ethan introduced himself politely, but his eyes searched the man's face for weakness, for signs of carelessness. The conversation moved quickly, sharper than Ethan expected. He asked Daniel what he wanted from his mother, how serious he was, and whether he understood her past. His voice remained low, but each question carried a warning shaped by love and fear. Daniel listened, trying to stay calm, but the message was clear. Ethan was drawing a boundary that was not his to draw. Daniel felt judged before being known, measured by standards he never agreed to meet. He answered honestly, saying he cared for Margaret and meant no harm, but Ethan pressed on, asking if he was prepared to leave if things became complicated. That question changed the room. Daniel realized he was not speaking to a curious son, but to a guard protecting a fragile world. The meeting ended with outraised voices, yet the air felt tight, unresolved. Daniel watched Ethan leave, understanding that no matter what he said, he had already been placed on trial. Later that evening, when Margaret confronted Ethan, the truth spilled out faster than he could control. He explained his actions in rushed sentences, his voice breaking as guilt replaced confidence. He said he only wanted to make sure she was safe, that he could not watch her be hurt again. Margaret listened quietly, her face calm but her eyes filled with something deeper than anger. She told him she understood his fear, but not his choice. She explained that love did not give him the right to step into her decisions or test the heart of someone she trusted. Ethan felt the ground shift beneath him. For the first time, he saw that his protection had become a wall, one that blocked not only danger, but happiness. The room fell silent as he realized he had crossed a line he never meant to approach. Margaret's voice stayed gentle but firm, reminding him that she had survived loss and loneliness, and she was allowed to choose joy again. Ethan lowered his head, the weight of regret settling in. Outside, night fell quietly, but inside both of them understood that something had changed. Love had not broken, but it had been challenged, and neither of them could pretend it had not happened. That night, after Ethan went home, Margaret sat alone in the quiet house. It's a kind of quiet that pressed against the ears and forced thoughts to rise. She turned off the lights and sat by the window, watching the street glow under soft lamps, thinking about the woman she had been and the woman she was becoming. For years, she had lived carefully, shaping her life around responsibility, grief, and routine, telling herself that peace meant staying still. Now she saw how easily others mistook her calm for weakness. She loved her son deeply, but love had slowly turned into something too tight, and she knew that was not healthy for either of them. She thought about Daniel, about the way his laughter felt honest and the way he listened without trying to fix her. She wondered if fear had already pushed him away. The thought made her chest ache, but it also woke something stronger inside her. The next morning, Margaret asked Ethan to come over. When he arrived, she didn't raise her voice or accuse him. She invited him to sit at the kitchen table, the same table where he once did homework and ate late-night snacks. She spoke clearly and calmly, choosing truth over comfort. She told him that crossing a line did not make him a bad son, but it did make him wrong. She explained that her life did not end with loss, and her heart was not something to be guarded, like a broken thing. Ethan listened in silence, his shoulders tense, his eyes wet. For the first time, he saw his mother not as someone who needed saving, but as someone brave enough to keep living. He admitted that fear had guided him, not trust. Margaret reached across the table and held his hand, telling him she did not need permission to love again, but she did need respect. The words settled between them, heavy but honest. Across town, Daniel sat alone in his apartment, replaying the meeting with Ethan in his mind, wondering if stepping away would be easier than stepping forward. He cared for Margaret, but he did not want to become the cause of tension between a mother and her son. He packed his doubts into silence, deciding to wait. Margaret, however, refused to let fear choose for her again. That evening, she wrote Daniel a message, simple and direct, telling him she wanted to talk, not to explain herself, but to stand for her own happiness. As she sent it, she felt a quiet strength settle in her chest. She had spent years surviving for others. Now she was learning how to live for herself. And that realization changed everything. Margaret found Daniel at a small cafe near the river, a quiet place where people spoke softly and time seemed to move slower. She arrived early, steady but nervous, knowing this conversation mattered. When Daniel walked in and saw her, surprise crossed his face, followed by relief he did not try to hide. They spoke without rushing, words flowing honestly, without blame or defense. Margaret told him what happened with Ethan, not to excuse it, but to make it clear that her choices were her own. She said she cared for Daniel and would not step away from something meaningful out of fear or pressure. Daniel listened closely, his doubts slowly giving way to respect. He admitted he had considered leaving to avoid conflict, but her strength changed his mind. They agreed to move forward carefully, not secretly, and with openness. At home, Ethan sat alone that evening, thinking about his mother's words. He replayed the moment he realized his love had crossed into control, and the shame softened into understanding. Days later, when Margaret invited him to meet Daniel again, Ethan arrived with humility instead of tension. The meeting was simple, honest, and calm. No warnings, no tests, just conversation. Ethan apologized without excuses, admitting he had acted out of fear. Daniel accepted it, seeing a young man learning where love ends and respect begins. As weeks passed, Margaret's home filled with warmth again. Her laughter returned, lighter than before. Ethan noticed the change and felt a quiet pride replace his worry. He saw his mother not losing him, but becoming more herself. One evening, they shared dinner, the three of them talking about small things, letting comfort grow naturally. Margaret watched her son and the man she cared for sit at the same table, and she felt surprised, not by the moment, but by how right it felt. The line that had been crossed did not break their bond. Instead, it reshaped it. Ethan learned that love does not mean standing in the way. Margaret learned that choosing happiness is not selfish. And Daniel learned that real love requires patience and courage. As the night ended and the house grew quiet again, Margaret stood by the window, smiling softly, grateful that the hardest moments had led them somewhere better, somewhere honest and somewhere hopeful.